All right. Well, I think we're about to get started. So, good afternoon and welcome to CyberArk and SecureITSource's first ever joint webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing CyberArk EPM and more specifically how you all can be successful with it addressing endpoint privilege. So before we get started, we've got a few housekeeping items to get out of the way. This session is being recorded and will be available for viewing after the webinar is concluded from CyberArk's website. In addition, we'll be taking questions throughout the webinar. So if you have any questions, just please put them in chat and we'll try to get to them in real time as we can. Otherwise, we'll save them for the end of the webinar. So for this webinar, we've got a few different goals. They all really are about how you can be successful with CyberArk EPM, right? It's about properly scoping a project so that you can be successful with it. And we'll share some of our experiences from over the years, as well as a few kind of best practices that you can use along the way. And the final thing that we hope to achieve through this webinar is to shine a light a little bit on one of my favorite core paths integrations with CyberArk EPM. And we'll talk about that pretty extensively through this webinar. So let's begin with introductions, I suppose. My name is Chris Underwood. I am the PAM practice lead for SecureITSource. I'm currently based out of Tampa, Florida, but you can see in the background I've lived all across the U.S. and outside of the U.S. as well, thanks to my time being in the Navy, which provides a really good background for security. I'll tell you the one thing that I like to share is the time that you spend kind of in the Navy in the middle of the ocean on a ship. You think about what you're saying over secure lines of communication, you get really paranoid and you become risk averse over time. And I think the transition out of the military was excellent for me and allowed me to really prescribe to these cybersecurity train of thought, so that every time we're doing something, we're thinking about, well, what's the worst case scenario and how do I bridge that? How do I introduce a control? So I'll be leading part of this presentation, but I'm going to pass it over to SecureITSource's subject matter expert on EPM, Rasan Knights.
Hey, thank you so much, Chris, and good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, as the slide suggests, I'm based out of Sandy Springs, Georgia, but I've also been quite around a few places as well. I've lived in Toronto, New York, but I've found my home to be here. And I've been a part of security for the better part of a decade. But the last 5 years is really fell into the IAM space. And I think what really excites me about it is how we work so much in tandem with other organizations in making sure that we ensure their success. So we deal with a lot of high impact applications that make huge changes to environments. And I think that makes me very excited about working with these different companies and just being a big part of their success. So, IAM's been a focus of mine, and of course, of SecureITSource's, and, we're really excited to talk about EPM today. We're going to jump into some of the focuses that we, as SecureITSource, work on, and Chris will, jump into that, and then we'll jump back into some more EPM things.
Awesome. Thank you, Rasan. So before we get too far into the presentation, I'd be doing myself and SecureITSource a disservice if we didn't properly introduce the company. SecureITSource is first and foremost an identity and access management consulting firm based out of Atlanta, Georgia. And since our inception, we've been focused on partnering with best-of-breed solutions to satisfy the three kind of major IAM components that you see on your screen right now. We've been partnered with CyberArk since the company founded to provide advisory and full hands-on keys engineering capabilities the entire time. Beyond privileged access management, right? We are an identity and access management consulting firm. So we look at the big picture, what that IAM umbrella includes, and the three major things that we focus on are governance, access management, and PAM, and really how they all tie together and how they can complement each other. So at SecureITSource, we have the opportunity to invest really heavily in our partnerships because we only invest, or we only partner with the best of breed solutions that you see on your screen. Every one of the partners you see here make up SecureITSource's partner ecosystem. So that allows us to invest heavily into our full-time employees to be certified at the highest level every time possible, and we'll always encourage that. So I hope that that's a really brief introduction to SecureITSource. Don't want to go too into the weeds there. If you have more questions after this, the website links at the bottom of each page. So now that we got that out of the way, we can get on to talking about endpoint privilege. So in order to talk about remote endpoint privilege and what that problem is, we need to identify what the problem is, right? And it comes down to excessive privilege, right? Least privilege is very rarely assigned, and the idea of assigning least privilege to a user's laptop is definitely difficult. You have a few different ways that you can go about it. You can, give them complete administrative rights, and they can do everything they need to be productive, or they don't have enough privilege and, it's causing a lot of issues. They can't install apps, they can't run the applications as appropriate, and causes a lot of downtime. So balancing that is difficult over time. So when we have a user and they have some level of administrative rights, it's also very difficult to tell, do they need it, right? If they're running certain applications with administrative rights, we have no way of telling, before EPM or any products like it, on how they're using that privilege. So this problem makes it, it makes endpoints really attractive to attackers, right? If my laptop has me as a user and I have excessive privilege, well, then I'm an easy target to get into the network, right? And we want to increase that security posture, decrease the threat surface over time. But, just recently, over the past 6 months, we've seen an explosion in the number of remote workers in today's workforce. 50% of the remote workers in 2020 actually are finding themselves in a remote work capability for the first time ever in their life. So what does that mean? That means that we have users working out of home offices that don't have, good security controls around their home networks. They haven't been exposed to this. They might be sharing their home with, their extended families to complete their work. So it really puts, the remote endpoint problem at the front of a lot of conversations. So if that's the problem, let's see how CyberArk's EPM kind of addresses the solution, right? So I brought up that excessive privilege is a major issue on our laptops. Just having admin rights is kind of crazy in these days. So what CyberArk EPM attempts to do is really three things, and we'll go through each. Least privileges management really just means I don't have, carte blanche administrative rights across the board. Instead, I only have the rights to do what I need to with certain applications, right? So if I can say, Chris doesn't have access to everything any longer, he only needs to be running a few subset of applications with administrative rights, well, that's great. And that's the first and primary thing that CyberArk EPM can do. Now, those applications that I was talking about also have a tendency to run, background processes and do a bunch of different things. So not only are we worried about, what I as a user am doing with my privilege, but we're worried about what the applications that are running on my laptop are doing as well. So we also have the ability with CyberArk EPM to address an application and what type of rights it uses. There are certain applications that do need to be run in an administrative mode. There are some that don't, and there are some, in between that we need to make a decision on. And CyberArk EPM helps us, address those and make policies that allow us to do that. And finally, the last aspect of this is huge. Credential theft blocking has been, a primary driver for a lot of privilege programs for a long time. We have, credentials stored in a hash or in a browser cache. We have credentials like a password stored in so many different places on our workstations that we need, a function to be able to restrict that actual access. And so when you combine these three different aspects of what CyberArk EPM addresses, it really does address the core problem of endpoint privilege. Purchasing, any product, IAM or otherwise, doesn't magically solve a problem, though. The way that we implement the product is going to give us, how successful we actually are. So the next thing I want to talk about is let's define success before we get into the weeds of, how we can be successful. So when we think about success for security products, I like to think about it this way. I like to think about how can we get the most return on our investment. And a lot of times that means I need to minimize the amount of time it takes to get that return on investment. So translated out of kind of sales talk, this means how quickly can we deploy? How quickly can we reduce the amount of threat within our environment? Next, maintaining productivity is always a difficult kind of aspect for deploying a new security product. Anytime we seem to deploy a security product, it tends to introduce hurdles that our end users have to jump through. So success with CyberArk EPM means that we've maintained our productivity. We have not impacted the business to be able to generate the income that is necessary for the business to thrive, right? This should be a goal of every IT project, but in security, it's doubly important because it has the potential to introduce a ton of different risks. So finally, minimizing risk. This is the whole point of of CyberArk EPM from a security practitioner's perspective. I need to reduce the amount of risk that an attacker could utilize my credentials and utilize my endpoint to get insight, reconnaissance or entry, whatever you want, into the network. So that's how I like to think about success with EPM. When we're talking about, deploying EPM with our clients, we need to focus on these three things. But a lot of times our clients think about it a little bit differently. They have specific requests that they want to, kind of get done. So up on your screen, you're going to see the three most common EPM requests that we typically see. Removal of administrative rights is a compliance issue or an audit issue, but it's also something that we really haven't seen too much except for the past few years. We've seen some customers say, in order to maintain our partnership with another partner of theirs, they have different line items that they need to meet, right? They need to be compliant. It's not a regulatory body telling them that they have to do it, but they have a line item that says your users shall not have administrative rights. And EPM provides us this facility to address this very, very quickly. But it doesn't address, all of the components that really give you the return on investment, the value. The second kind of client that typically comes to us has removed administrative rights from most of their workforce's laptops. But what that means is they can't do simple things like installing a new application. They can't run specific features. Their developers are constantly handicapped by needing to, go to the help desk every time they need to, install a new library. It's a big problem because it's not flexible and it has a lot of costs associated with it. So some of our clients come to us and say, listen, we just need to reduce the costs in a way that's a little bit secure. We don't need to go the entire way, but we need something to reduce these costs. And finally, the client that sees the full value of EPM are the ones that are focused on reducing risk. And they'll get the audit and the compliance and the reduction in costs. But at the end of the day, they reduce risk by providing least privilege across the board as much as possible to all of their workstations. So these are a lot of kind of business drivers for EPM. And now we're going to transition into, the actual deployment and some best practices, thanks to our subject matter expert, Rasan Nice. So Rasan, you're up.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Yes, some really important things there. I'm glad that Chris hit on. We definitely deal with a bunch of different situations, which leads right into this slide when we're talking about our actual deployment plan. So we see the same things, regardless of what the organization that we're working with wants to accomplish. There's a few key points that we need to keep in mind before we even press go, right? What are we actually using to deploy our software? A lot of folks will have maybe an SCCM solution. If you're deploying to Mac workstations, you'll have Jamf. What does that look like? And do you have your own strategy for deploying these applications? The reason why this is so important is because when we talk about the removal of local administrative rights, that is at its core what we want to do, but we want to obviously accomplish other things with the tool as well, right? So we need to build our strategy for deployment to match your deadline for removing actual local administrative rights from your workstation. Some folks that we've worked with in the past have used like a Microsoft Ring strategy, in which we'll work with our internal IT teams before we expand the scope of the application. I love the product EPM simply because we can push it in a way that we're not highly impacting the environment, we're not highly impacting work, and we can scale. All right, so we can essentially mold your deployment plan in accordance to your own deadlines for certain things that need to get done. And then finally, the last item there is security tools. What teams are available, what tools are available in your environment for us to pull data? Because we need to know exactly how many local administrators actually exist in your enterprise. We need to be able to reach out to every machine. And in a lot of situations, a lot of folks on the line will probably attest to this. You have an Active Directory environment that maybe is a little bit old, a little stale with data. So we have to get that up to speed. We need to be 100% sure that we're targeting all the workstations in your environment and 100% sure that we removed every local administrator. And sometimes that could be a challenge, but that's why we work with your security teams and we make sure that we have the tools to do so. So now that we discussed this, we're going to jump into some EPM phases. And this is kind of high level, and we'll get a little bit deeper, but we're going to just discuss kind of what this looks like in a phased approach. So we kind of just talked about it, the things that we think about before we even press go, discovery. We need to find out what exactly is going on in the environment, how many endpoints actually exist, because this is going to go into our whole strategy for deploying. We want to do application discovery, super important. We want to know exactly what is being used in the enterprise. A lot of folks, are aware of maybe some high-level applications, but this is where we get into the weeds. EPM is going to gather all that data for us. And as I was just stating, 9 times out of 10, we're going to start in our own team. The IT staff is going to be accustomed to deploying applications and changes. So we'll work with those internal teams first before we move on from that point. So next after discovery is deployment. We're actually going to deploy. So what are we doing in this phase? Well, with deployment, we want to ensure, again, that we implement a pilot program. So what we'll do is essentially we'll scan the entire environment. We'll find out all the departments, all the users, all the endpoints, what OUs they belong to. And we're going to deploy in a manner that we don't impact the entire environment. For instance, we'll deploy to maybe a 10%, right, of each department. So if something crazy or adverse happened, only 10% of that department is impacted. And, should there be an issue, again, EPM is designed so well in where we can scale back a policy that might be impacting users. But again, it's this whole mindset of, yeah, we want to get secure, but we'll get there over time, right? So what we'll do at first is we'll mitigate high risks, threats. Obviously, we'll speak with your security teams. And even without speaking with your security teams, we can see the data. So we can see the applications that are being used the most, and we'll immediately know whether or not those are safe or not. And we'll get a little bit more into that later. But yeah, this is what we really want to think about with deployment, not impacting the enterprise and mitigating the high-risk threats first. So next, we'll get into expanding and securing. So at this point, we've deployed to the entire environment. We're aware of all our local administrators. We've ensured that every single workstation has EPM on the endpoint. Well, now we're going to take care of, lower risk applications. This is going to be more like app control. So, maybe we have applications we only want launched from certain network locations. Maybe we want certain applications only used by certain people and groups, maybe because there's a licensing factor where we only are allowed, 5,000 users to use something. So we want to ensure we lock these things down. We control our apps in accordance to what our policy is, what your policy is, right? And of course, we'll address the remaining business goals. These are all the other cool features that EPM has to offer besides just least privilege. So let's get a little bit deeper into expanding and securing. And let's just talk about a little bit more about what this means. So we're obviously removing local administrative rights, right? So now they no longer have the keys to the castle. So what are we doing next? Well, we're going to ensure we place ransomware protection on each device. So essentially what this is just saying, hey, I recognize that we all use Microsoft Office, to open up our, documents. We have certain applications that we use to open up our, Excel files and things like that. I'm essentially just making a list of the applications that we use and saying, hey, guess what? We're not going to use anything outside a list of these approved applications for these file extensions that exist in our enterprise. And that's super important. So we can't have a malicious attacker that maybe gains access and tries to overtake a system with ransomware because we've already locked down the applications that are allowed to open those file extensions. I've seen plenty of times, organizations have a whole slew of PDF viewers. People will download freeware and things like that. And this is a really great opportunity to, have some discussions and say, hey, what do we approve? What do we really want to use here? And of course, we could make those controls at first, but then get, later on down the line, get more secure, get more refined with what we want to use and what we accept as an organization. Next is privilege threat protection. Chris was kind of touching on this. Super important. We're not just storing our passwords in Windows directories anymore. I am definitely guilty of storing a bunch of my passwords in Google Chrome for a bunch of different applications. And so CyberArk EPM is aware of that, and they continually expand these policies that are built in. Very, very useful. But like, for instance, they have a Chrome credential theft policy for privileged threat protection. And this is very useful as we expand where passwords are stored. So there's tools like this that we'll implement over time as well. Next is application management. And again, we kind of discussed this a little bit before, but essentially we're saying, hey, your local administrative rights are gone, and you have applications that require local administrative rights to run. And we know this, so we're going to build policies to empower you. We're not going to just take away your keys and not allow you to work. So we're going to build policies that empower our user by providing the privileges for them, but only, again, for the applications that they actually need. That's the least privilege model. And then last but not least is, again, just delegation, really. We're just saying, hey, this group is allowed to use this. This team is allowed to use this. They can only launch it from here or here, from certain repositories. We're just locking things down so that, we don't have a huge surface area in which people, again, have access to things they shouldn't. So that's where our final piece comes into play. So now we're going to jump into some of my, two of my favorite topics, but best practices and lessons learned. So,
hey, Rassan, before we get there, the amount of EPM phases can be shortened if needed, right? This isn't a prescription. This is something that we're going to be in communication with every organization. Can you speak a little bit to, what a rapid approach might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've actually experienced an organization that had this, and they recognize from a security perspective that, hey, we know all the cool things EPM has to do, but we've got 3 months or 2 months, I think it was like 2.5 months, and we've got to remove local administrative rights. So EPM has actually adopted a fast track program in which we can target local administrators, we could take away their admin rights, and through the program actually give them the exact same privileges. Now, this just checks the box. We're not fully secure where we want to be, but we're able to implement a strategy that goes specific to that issue, right? We can strip administrative rights, check the box, but make sure that everybody's working. So it all depends on, again, the organization's deadlines and what they need to have accomplished. But expand and secure, what you're seeing on your screen, this is the end goal, right? This is what EPM is capable of doing. This is what we can manage. Some folks have security tools that maybe already manage ransomware. That's true. But these tools here are managed on every endpoint, right? Because the agent's there, so why not utilize them? But that's what I would definitely say about that is the fast track program provides that ability to target administrative rights very quickly and provide that check, if you will. So now, when we talk about best practices, these are some things that over time, again, through our deployments and through our work with other organizations have come to be, again, best practices and things that CyberArk also absolutely agrees with. So when we look at tool overlap, minimizing interference, we kind of just talked about this. Your organization is going to already have security tools, right? You might have McAfee out there. You might have Trend Micro. You might have Tanium. Well, we want to ensure that we make mutual exclusions because we don't want to get a whole bunch of noise as far as events coming in from them that we don't really need to know. We know that those are already secure. And in addition, we don't want their tools saying, hey, we see a bunch of network traffic and we don't know what this tool is. Well, hey, let's make sure we have those conversations and let's make sure we make day one mutual exclusions. Super, super important because we're going to get a clean inbox as far as events. And of course, our security teams will be aware, hey, we're coming in and we'll make sure that we don't block anything from you and you guys don't block anything from us. So that's a day one feature or best practice, I should say, that we want to implement. Next, privileged threat protection. Well, we just kind of talked about this, right? We've had previous organizations that want to ensure that Windows credential harvesting, like LSAS, SAM credential harvesting, where those primary areas in Windows that your credentials would be stored. We want to protect that. But as we expand where we save our usernames and passwords, like in browsers, we want to turn those things on as well. Now, best practice, though, as you can see here kind of in the screenshot, yeah, we could turn all of these on, but we're going to get a lot of noise, right? So best practice, we want to turn like one on at a time. And instead of turning it on for the entire enterprise, we're going to tie it down to just a group of users, right? Because what we're going to do is we're going to get some false positives that show up, and we'll immediately say, hey, we know that's safe, ignore that, ignore that, ignore that, and then we can really get to the data that we want to control. So that's kind of the thought process when we're talking about implementing privileged threat protection. We'll just take our time with it. Next is prioritizing popular applications. Now, you'll see in a screenshot right next to events, there's a little down arrow there. Day one, this is always what I do because we're going to get a bunch of events. We're going to get some application triggers here, right? But I want to see what is the majority of the enterprise using. Well, we can see here Microsoft Teams, right? And 9 times out of 10, every organization, we're going to see a whole bunch of Microsoft products, maybe Microsoft Office, Google Chrome launches, you name it. We're going to see what's used the most. And why not target what's used the most? I think that's super important because we can day one start building policies that affect the entire enterprise as a whole, and then get to maybe more granular policies that only affect certain groups because only that group uses that application rather than the whole organization that uses Outlook or whatever tool that might be. So we want to prioritize popular applications. Super important and a day one strategy that I definitely want everyone to practice. So loosely connected devices. Chris is going to talk about this a little bit deeper, but I know he loves this tool. I love this tool. And the fact that EPM is a part of the entire PaaS solution is so awesome because they added this feature. Now, we know we're going to remove every single user's local administrative rights, but there's still going to be that root admin account that's on every box. So, a break-fix situation where a user's laptop dies and they take it into the, computer help desk and, those folks, fix their system or whatever, they're going to utilize that root account to accomplish this. So we want to ensure that that password is actually rotated and it doesn't become a stale password that is the same for like a year plus, right? Super important to manage. But yeah, Chris will jump into that a little bit further down the line. And then last but not least, addressing developer applications. I absolutely love this because developers, you guys know, are going to be using robust applications. They're going to be using IDE compilers. They're going to need access to local parts of their machine because that's where they build all of the things. They need specialized access. EPM recognizes that. So we have a section just there for developers. So day one, I'm already reaching out to people in those teams and finding out, what is it they use, and I'm empowering them by making sure their Visual Studio and their builders are added because we don't want to slow down their compilers, especially when some of these things take an hour plus, right? So these are some day one best practices that we're already thinking about managing when we are thinking about EPM deployments. So next, we're going to go into some lessons learned. What did we learn from deploying to all of these different environments? Well, we kind of talked about prioritizing popular applications, right? So that's where global policies comes into play. I know that every organization I go into is going to be using some type of Microsoft Office suite or some type of Office suite, period. They're going to have chat programs like Slack or Skype or whatever it might be. They're going to have to install WebEx over and over and over again. We know this. So why not create a global policy that bundles all of these into one? We know the entire organization uses them. Let's empower them day one by creating a policy that includes all the stuff that everyone uses. Very important to manage what's being used the most and then get to the more nitty-gritty stuff, right? Next, we're going to talk about our break glass procedure, one of my favorite tools. So, we've had incidents where a user calls in on Saturday, they have their laptop, they're on the other side of the earth, and, well, they just have to install this new application. There's no policy available, and guess what? The EPM administrator is on vacation. So they call the help desk. Well, this tool is what we can use to empower our help desk. By utilizing this tool, our customer can call in from anywhere on the globe as long as they have an internet connection and say, hey, I need to install this application. They can provide a code to the help desk, and the help desk will utilize this code to provide an additional code to our user who will then be able to use that application, who will be able to elevate that application. And as it states, we could even set a validation period for how long we want them to be able to use it. So a very important tool, very useful tool. Next, we're going to talk about troubleshooting with file properties. Absolutely a day one thing that I like to implement. Now, some organizations, they just don't want anyone to know that they're implementing a new security product, just simply because the culture is maybe one of where we want least impact. But this is a tool that I always suggest everyone implements. Customer calls in, they say, hey, my application is not working as it normally does. And, ever since EPM came in, I don't understand this application is not working. Well, hey, we can very quickly right-click on an application, hit the properties. We're all familiar with that. But this EPM tab is something that EPM adds. And it says, hey, this application is affected by this policy. So it's a very, very useful tool in me helping a user out and saying, hey, I don't know, exactly what might be affecting this application, but I could find out very quickly using this tool. Next, we're going to discuss configuring high reputation policies. Now, on your right, this is kind of what a policy will look like in EPM when we're building it out. Now, I don't want you to pay attention so much to every single field of data here, but just notice how every field is filled in. I think it's very unrealistic to believe that we'll have a situation in which every field of data will be filled in like this, like when we look at the product version, for instance, right? But we want to have a mindset in which we work towards this. We want to get as granular as possible, but we want to do that over time. Something like this is an unrealistic policy. We're locking it down to a specific user, a specific folder, and even an argument for the specific application. But again, this is the mindset that we always push for every organization. If you guys have homebrew applications that you build internally, let's go ahead and get a signature. Let's get them signed. Let's ensure that we put as much data as we can into these fields to make the reputation for these policies high. Because EPM has a reputation system, green, yellow, red being the worst, green being the highest, in which we can, delegate how secure an application is. Super important, and again, a security lesson that we've learned that we try to teach every organization. And then last but not least, policy audit controls. I absolutely love this tool. Chris was mentioning that there's certain applications that we just have to elevate because that's how the program works, right? And when we talk about things that are risky, like PowerShell, right, and elevating that, there's certain users and groups that will be allowed to use that, and we'll tie that down, right? But how do we know that that user still needs it? What if a month from now that developer leaves the group and joins another team, or goes on vacation or leave? I specifically remember a member going to the National Guard for 6 months, so he was away. What do we do for users that have that access, but they're no longer using it? Well, we use policy audit controls. So we can literally add an audit to our most scary applications, I would say. And we can ensure that, hey, we run a report maybe every 30 days. And we've had an organization that's done this that said, hey, if you don't use it, you lose it. So every 30 days, we'd have a report that says, hey, John and Sarah, they did not use their elevation, so we deem it necessary to take away their rights. And if they need to use it again, they'll just have to request it. So we can really tighten the controls around who has access and then be mindful of auditing that access. So we've had a lot of organizations that have people with access for too long. And this is one of those tools that I absolutely love. I implement every time, especially around the applications like, again, PowerShell, command prompt, things like that, right? So now we're going to actually jump into how EPM fits in to the whole core PAS, solution as far as CyberArk goes. So I'm going to pass it back to Chris, where he's going to discuss this a little bit further.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rasan. You can definitely tell, you've been working with our clients for a long time. We're happy to have you here. Folks, if you have any interest in speaking with Rasan, you can find him on LinkedIn, of course. So we'll move right into where does EPM kind of fit into CyberArk in general, right? Because CyberArk is a privilege kind of solution stack. Right, so you see, if you're familiar with CyberArk's core PAS offering, you've probably seen this image a dozen times, but what you probably didn't notice right away is this EPM and how it does actually fit back into this core PAS standard. So one of the newest kind of innovations from CyberArk EPM is this concept of loosely connected devices. And it was introduced, I think, about a year and a half ago, and it's really built to support the core PAS platform. So I have an image over here on the right side of your screen, and what that's meant to evoke is the kind of experience that we see when we first log into CyberArk with new clients. A lot of times we have local administrator users on end user devices in a failed state. Now that could be to a multitude of reasons, but what it really drives down to the core is, well, sometimes laptops are offline. You have to expect that. You can't be able to rotate, something that's offline. And you can build some policies and be creative and try to get to it, but ultimately it's a lot of overhead to do something as simple as rotating a single, user credential. So you see these over here in the red, these administrators, that means that CyberArk stopped trying, right? And we don't ever want to get to that point. We want to make sure that CyberArk is an effective tool for everything that we're using it for. So a lot of organizations end up with kind of these accounts in a perpetual lockout state. So we want to avoid that. And CyberArk EPM loosely connected devices, as you saw a little bit earlier, can facilitate that. So I really want to shine a light on this because I think it's a really cool feature and really helpful and seriously would be, a benefit to 90% of the clients that we talk to if they utilize this. When a device is offline, obviously it can't be rotated, but we have an agent potentially on your workstation that has the ability to phone home and say, hey, am I due for my checkup? Do I need a rotation? And as long as that device has the ability to communicate with a PWA, your website, then you're not going to have any issues. And that that account will be immediately updated, and you no longer have to worry about being creative. I like to think that creating creative or novel technical solutions 9 times out of 10 is the wrong way to think about it. This is a way that you don't have to be creative in creating a policy that says, hey, try between the hours of, let's say, noon and 8 p.m. and skip a day in between, because sometimes people take 2 days off. We don't want to deal with any of that. We want a very simple solution that will always work for us. And loosely connected devices is just this amazing feature that you all absolutely have to know about. So I'm glad I got that. Glad I got to share that with you today. So we'll move on into some Q&A. I noticed that we had some questions come in, and some of them were addressed in real time. But Rasan, one of the questions that I saw come in was regarding, if I jump back actually, a bunch of slides to your, it's where you can request, I think I might have skipped it. Yes, so the OPAG tool. So Rasan, one of the questions was regarding this OPAG tool, and the user basically said, could a user just lie and say that, they're not trying to install Mimikatz or some, malware, they're trying to install, I don't know, Microsoft Word. Is that possible?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, so the way this tool, so first of all, the tool is designed in a way that we're going to build a certificate to it, and we're going to lock it down to specific users. So nobody outside of our help desk, for instance, will be able to use this tool at all. And number two, let's say our user calls in and, they want to be a malicious insider and they want to install Mimikatz, right? So they're going to have to right-click on the application and, create that request code. Now, here's the cool part. So when the help desk receives this code and they entered it into the request ID field, it's going to populate all of these fields. So if the user calling in saying, hey, I need you to elevate this now, and the help desk puts in that ID, well, they're going to very quickly see that, well, the application is different from what the user just said that they wanted to install. And even if they manipulated some of those file properties, well, EPM has taken it a step further in which we can check it by virus total right there in the tool. So we can immediately have the help desk, again, empowered to find out whether or not, hey, is this application what the customer said it was? And I'm going to go ahead and scan it to make sure it's safe as well. So a great feature in providing the access, to anybody around the world and on off hours especially, but in addition, it's secure.
Perfect. Thank you, Rasan. And we have one more active question. So the question is, does it integrate with Microsoft PKI certs, or is it a replacement? So I'm wondering if you have any insight here, but when I think about these certificates, I'm not really thinking about a user's privilege so much as their identity. Do you have any experience with the PKI kind of aspect in EPM? I don't believe it's an integration point, but I could be wrong.
I don't really believe it's an integration point. So I've had users before that needed to build out certs on their local machine. So we essentially had to build out some policies in which they had that local access, but that's as far as the extent goes. EPM is designed in a way that whatever it is that user is building on their endpoint, we can build policy around it to ensure that it works and tighten those controls specific to what it is that they're doing. So again, I don't believe it's so much of an integration as it is empowering the user with the access they'll need to continue building the certs out on their endpoint.
Okay, so a little bit of clarification from the user. It is their identity, and we can probably catch up a little bit more in depth with this specific question afterwards to talk about it. But he was referring to their identity, saying that all machines within their environment have a certificate. So regardless of how a user is logging into their workstation, it's the privilege assigned to that type of user. We're really talking about, I think, the authorization kind of portion versus the authentication portion with PKI. But we'll follow up with that question one-on-one, just so that we can make sure we get to the root of it. And I don't see any additional questions at the moment, and I think we are a little bit over time. So I want to thank everybody. I'm not sure if I had a chance to thank CyberArk, but we were really happy, to be partnered with CyberArk for over 5 years now. It's been a great time, and we're really happy that we were able to have this event with you today. And I want to thank everybody that was able to attend. It's not easy to find time within the day to attend these webinars, so we really value your time. If you have any questions, CyberArk is the go-to for everything privileged access. There's a reason why we partner with them, so please don't hesitate to reach out. And if you're looking for a partner that has, deep experience in EPM and every other aspect of CyberArk solution stack, we've got our website right on the webinar right now. So we appreciate it, and we'll end it here.